This week's Torah portion is called Bo, and in it we read about a lot. We read about the last of the last three of the 10 plagues that God brought upon the land of Egypt, upon the Egyptians and upon Pharaoh. We understand that God is going to bring out the Jewish people with signs and wonders. And these plagues are supernatural. They undo creation and they bring about great destruction, and they bring about great pain and suffering on behalf of the Egyptians. And the goal, we read in many places, the goal is to educate the world, educate the Jews, educate the Egyptians and Pharaoh of the oneness of God, God of creation, God of immanence, God who is in the world, orchestrating things, with us all the time, and that there are no other gods. There's only this one God. Ein od milvado. There's nothing other than God. And as we know, the Egyptians had many gods. They had Pharaoh was a god to them. The river Nile was a god, and the sun was a god. The sun Ra, the sun god. And it was understood at that time in Egypt that Pharaoh was the son of the sun god, with the sun S-O-N of the sun god S-U-N. And this plague of darkness, I want to focus on the plague of darkness, even though there's a lot more to talk about. This is the plague I want to talk about. That in this week's Torah portion, God tells Moses to raise his hand up into the heavens and bring down darkness upon the land. It's a very interesting way of describing that darkness is going to descend on the land. So I want to take us back to the beginning of creation, when God created when God created creation, when he created the universe. It says in the very beginning of Genesis that there was darkness. There was a spirit that hovered over the darkness, and then God created light. So there was light and there was dark right at the beginning of Genesis. And we don't learn about the creation of the sun and the moon until day 4. So this light that was created on day 1, at the very beginning of creation, is not a light that comes from a sun. It's a spiritual light. It's a intense light, apparently, that allows mankind, if we have access to this light, because it was hidden away, but when we have access to this light allows us to see from one end of the universe to the other. It's a light of clarity, of truth, of knowing. It's an intense, hidden away light that comes out at certain times. So we understand that it comes out in our Hanukkah candles, that this hidden light comes out in the Hanukkah candles, which is why we're asked to look into the Hanukkah candles and soak it up and imagine a different future. It's also the light that was, we understand that there's a story, a Jewish story, that a baby in utero has a lamp above its head. And from this light, from this lamp, it can see from one end of the universe to the other. It knows all of the truths of the world, all the truths that the child knows as it's learning all of the wisdom of the world in utero, then gets absorbed into ourselves, into our bodies, and our life is a time of bringing that out, of relearning what was pushed inside of us at birth. That was the lamp by which an infant, a fetus in utero, is learning all of the wisdom, all of Torah it learns using this light. So the light that when Moses reaches his hands up into the heavens and he brings down the darkness, say some of our commentators, it was actually bringing down this light. It was actually bringing down the Shekhinah, the divine presence. There was so much brightness that came into the world that the Egyptians, who were mired in, worshipping gods, small g, that they worshiped the Nile and they worshiped the sun and they worshiped Pharaoh and they were mired in idolatry, etc., that this truth, this light of truth that came down into the world was so beyond their capacity to absorb that they were literally blinded by the light. It wasn't that darkness came down, although some places we read that it was darkness, but it was such a brilliant light of the hidden light that was day 1 in the creation of the universe, that light was so powerful and so strong that it blinded the Egyptians, who were unable to absorb that light because they were mired in idolatry and they were not looking to undo their belief system. They were not looking to connect to God. the way in which there's a very profound foundational Jewish teaching that the way in which we go and the way we choose to go, God will help us in that way. So we have the Mitzrayim, the Egyptians. They were not looking to connect to God. They didn't want to undo their belief systems. They didn't want to accept God. And we know Pharaoh didn't want to accept God. And so they were going in that direction. So God says, okay, I'm bringing down this light, this Shekhinah, this divine powerful light is coming into the world, but because you don't want it, you will experience it as darkness. Juxtaposed to the Jewish people who did want to have a connection with God. They did want to be redeemed from Egypt. They did want to move from a place of darkness to a place of light. And so this light to them gave them light wherever they went. So the experience of the Egyptians was one of darkness, and the experience of the Jews was one of light. And with that light, they could see beyond, they could have clarity of what they were about. And they went into the homes of the Egyptians, and they were able to see where the jewels and the treasures and the silver and the gold of the Egyptians was hidden. They could see that. But they didn't steal anything. They didn't take anything. They just noted where everything was. So when it was time for them to leave, they could say to the Egyptians, I know you have treasure here and you have treasure there, because I saw it during the plague of darkness. With this hidden away light, this light of clarity and truth that they had access to during the plague of darkness, because it says that the Jewish people had light wherever they went. So this is not a natural light coming from the sun. This is a spiritual light that the Jews were yearning for. We also understand that 4/5, 80% of the Jewish people didn't want to see that light. They also were so mired in the teachings and the ways of the Egyptians that they were living with, and they were so entrenched in that way of thinking that they also didn't want to they also were incapable of attaching themselves to God. And the 4/5 of the Jewish people died during the plague of darkness. They died when the Egyptians couldn't see that they were dying. They were buried, and they were like, that happened during the plague of darkness because they didn't merit. They didn't have the desire to follow God into the wilderness, to follow him, to follow God and go and leave Egypt. And so they were killed during the plague of darkness. So the first point I want to bring out is where are we going? Where are we heading? The Egyptians were mired in their idolatry. That's what they were about. So God helped them do that, right? Do you want to do that? Fine. Then your access to this light you'll experience it as darkness. Whereas the Jewish people who merited to leave, who did want a connection to God, experienced this heavenly divine light as light that they would lit them up and gave them clarity and gave them a perspective that they didn't have before. Another point I want to bring out in this Torah portion, it says that the Egyptians in the second half of the plague, so the first half of the plague was darkness, and they lost all their senses. They lost all their senses. They lost their sense of sight. They also lost their sense of hearing and their sense of taste and their sense of smell. They went all inside. It was almost like they became unable to interact with the world around them. They became very self-focused. And we understand the Egyptians were selfish. They were very self-centered and oblivious to other people. And it says in the Torah, in this week's Torah portion, that the darkness descended and they couldn't see each other. It wasn't just a physical seeing. They couldn't not just see each other physically. They couldn't see each other emotionally. They couldn't connect with each other. They were so self-centered and so selfish that nothing else mattered to them. Their egos and their self-centeredness prevented them from having meaningful relationships with anything or anyone else. And so in that desire to be, in that character trait of being selfish, so God continued that journey for them. And when they lost all their perceptions, their sight and their hearing and their taste and their touch and their smell, they kind of went inside. And it says that they became, in our teachings, that they became almost like they're in solitary confinement, really like paralyzed. They couldn't move. Not only could they not see the other, they couldn't see and understand each other, but they became so self-centered and so egocentric that they became paralyzed, that they couldn't move. almost like a very, very, very severe depression came upon them, hopelessness and lack of desire to get up, and incapable of getting up. And that's what happened to the Mitzrayim when they were in this plague of darkness. Not only could they not experience the world around them, but it took them to a place where they were so, like, almost in solitary confinement. They were just on their own, alone with themselves, divided from each other. Juxtaposed to what happened to the Jewish people, where this light allowed them to connect with each other, to want to use the light to create more relationships, to connect to God, to connect to truth, to be loving, to be compassionate, to have empathy for each other. And that's the antithesis. So during this plague of darkness, there was a creation of darkness in the way that the Egyptians experienced it, and there was a creation of light in the way that the Jews experienced it. And there was almost antithetical. The way in which you want to go is the way God helps you. The Jews wanted to follow God. The Jews wanted to have a relationship with God. The Jews wanted to be connected to the God of the Jews. And God helped them and gave them light, gave them the capacity to be kind to each other, gave them the hope for a better future. And one more little piece in here is that we also learn the first mitzvah in the Torah is given in this week's Torah portion. It's the mitzvah of sanctifying the new moon, the moon. We sanctify the moon when it's most imperceptible, a little slither of light, a little slither of the moon is when we recognize that there's more to come. We sanctify the moon. Our calendar is based on a moon cycle because the moon represents the Jewish people. The moon waxes and wanes. It gets very, very small, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it goes back down again, and it comes back up and down and up and down. And there's this waxing and waning of the moon, which represents the way in which the Jewish people are experiencing the world. We go down, we come up, we go down. We have periods of being strong and being very present in the world, and then we have periods of being small and so on. But they will ultimately it will end with the fullness, with the light shining out. So when we speak about the light, I really think it's talking about the light of godliness, the light that motivates us to be good, to do good, to be kind, to be loving, to seek truth, to seek connection to God. When we do those things, we're bringing light into the world. And that's the mission of our mission till today, is in the darkness to shine the light. When it feels bleak, when it feels hopeless, when it feels that we have almost like disappeared, almost like when there's hardly any moon left, then we have hope. Then we gravitate towards bringing light and pulling the moon beyond the little slither into a fullness. And by doing acts of kindness, by praying for each other, by connecting to God, by talking to God, by being empathetic for each other, all of these things and beyond, many, many more things we could be doing, learning Torah, that's bringing light into the world. So on the one hand, there's the capacity to be selfish and to go into darkness and depression and paralysis and self-centeredness and egocentricity. We can go that direction, or we can go in the direction of selflessness and of spiritual light and sight, and bring godliness, bring love, bring connection, bring relationship, bring goodness into the world. And when we do that, we will dissipate the darkness.